Today we are discussing about women's resistance, the unyielding spirit of anti-colonial struggle. You know, most times when we talk about the anti-colonial resistance and anti-colonial struggles of the Igbo people, most times we fall back to Ekumeku resistance, as though Ekumeku resistance was the only one, but it's not. There were so many other resistances that stood shoulder to shoulder with Ekumeku. One of them is this about women's resistance. The about women's resistance, fact check this, remains one of the largest anti-colonial resistance struggle in West Africa. You can place it alongside the Mau Mau and Ekumeku resistance. It was a very large resistance. So that is why historians chose to refrain from the British coloration of it to call it a riot. It wasn't a riot. That was a resistance. Now, we're not going to talk about the Enugu bloodbath as well. There were so many other resistances in Igbo land, showing once again that the Igbo people are people that, I won't say ungovernable, but they are not people that you can easily dominate. They are people that usually know when and how to stand strong for their rights. History has proven it so. Historically, the Igbo people have been now known to always stand for their rights. You saw that in Ekumeku, 31 years plus, over 31 years of resisting colonialism. You saw that in the Aba women's resistance. You saw that in Enugu bloodbath, when workers decided to tool down and stop working. Not just to stop working and stay at home, but to also picket around the workplace. In the heart of Nigeria, where tradition meets modernity, a significant chapter of resistance reshaped the nation's landscape. And this is the story we are going to talk about, the story about women's resistance. In 1929, thousands of women in Aba, a town in present-day southeastern Nigeria, rose against British colonial rule in one of the largest anti-colonial struggles in West Africa. Their courageous act symbolized not just a fight against colonial oppression, but a bold assertion of female agency. But what sparked this uprising? That is what we are going to look at. A few days ago, I saw a comment on my post. I was actually celebrating women because if you have followed us all this while, at least in the past 1 week or 2 weeks, most of our documentaries are about Igbo people who have succeeded in making a mark on the global stage, especially in the entertainment field and then in governance. So most of the people that we talked about, their mother was actively present in their life. And I said, this is just the Igbo woman expressing who she is. And somebody said, Igbo women are usually suppressed in Igbo culture. So we took on the topic. For the records, there's no position a man can hold in Igbo land that a woman cannot hold, including kingship. We have had a female king in Enugu Ezike. We've had a female king in my hometown of Ubuluku, an ancient town. We've had a female king in Ogwashuku. And it goes on and on. Till today, we still have a variance. Everywhere you have a Diopala, you have Ada. Everywhere you have Obi, you have Omu. In most places, actually. So, the women folk are allowed to express their rights to full potential. There are decisions women can make, and no king can overturn it. There are topics in the society that are in women's jurisdiction. Men don't even have the right to discuss it or to judge it. So, these women, because they know their rights, they know their left from their right, were able to stand against colonial administration. Please, if you're just seeing this live stream, kindly share it to your audience. And also drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We have somebody who is watching all the way from Germany in Munich. So, still on the about women's resistance, the immediate catalyst for that uprising was the introduction of the warrant chiefs by the colonial administration. Now, those warrant chiefs undermined traditional leaders and enforced unpopular taxes on women. This disenfranchisement ignited a spark among the women of Aba. Every Igbo society has its traditional governance. Even if there is no overarching king, power is shared. Everyone is given a right, fair hearing at most. The youths have a say. Otu ndị ikorobịa, they have otu ụmụ agbọghọ. So ndị ntorobịa nwere their own otu. Every group, elders have a council until warrant chiefs were now introduced, who started undermining the powers and functions of these traditional institutions. So, as it went on, figures like Nwanyirowa emerged, uniting women across the region. They organized themselves in secrecy, holding meetings and disseminating information, displaying remarkable leadership against a backdrop of repression. They started organizing themselves to rebel against the decisions of these warrant chiefs. Now, on the 18th of November 1929, the tension culminated. Thousands of women, imagine as at 1929 having thousands of women come out. One cannot even think about mobilizing such number these days. If you say thousands of women should come out today for protest, will they come out? Will you even have 100? Will you have 50? Can you have 200? If you decide to mobilize women today for a protest against something that affects the society, will you be able to mobilize 50? Now we are looking at thousands of women coming out to the streets. And this is fact-based. You can fact-check it. Thousands of women marched to the colonial offices to protest. In a show of solidarity, they sang, they danced, and they voiced their grievances while facing brutal repression and oppression from the colonial forces. That is the attitude, that is the strength, that is what the Igbo women, the Igbo people are known for. The women are not excluded. Now, though they met with violent suppression during this move, the Aba women's resistance marked a turning point in Nigerian history. As noted by historians like Professor Adiele Afikpo, the event paved way for future independence movements, demonstrating the power of collective action, especially among a tribe. The Aba women's resistance, the Ekumeku resistance, although not fully credited but recognized by historians, paved the way for the discussions concerning independence. And that was, I don't know how old Herbert Macaulay will be as at 1920s when this happened. So as at 1929, Herbert Macaulay may just be around 15, 16 years old when all this happened. And these were the people who are claimed to have started the moves for our independence. So this is just to let you know that the moves for Nigeria's independence were initiated mainly by these people and their action. One, the Ekumeku anti-colonial resistance struggle, and two, this about women's resistance. I also mentioned the bloodbath in Enugu at Udi Hill. Now, the about women's resistance remains an emblem of resistance and empowerment. It reminds us very clearly that within the fight against oppression, women's voices played a pivotal role. Within the voices against our oppression, women played a pivotal role. Their legacy continues to inspire modern movements for justice and equality. Now, it is very important that we understand this. And this was colonial Nigeria. That in colonial Nigeria, women's voices played a role in ensuring our liberation. Not just during the Aba women's resistance because it is named after women, but even during Ekumeku. The last time I made a video about Ekumeku resistance, I mentioned a woman called Enuani. Enuani Agene is the woman after whom Enuani Primary School in Ubuluku was named. She was an Ekumeku warrior, and as at the time, she was Nobolo. Nobolo is like the spiritual head of Obolo Kingdom. Obolo Kingdom is an ancient kingdom in Anyocha South local government area of Delta State, where you have the headquarters of Ekumeku. So, women played pivotal role in our liberation. They were not backbenchers. So when I come online and I see comments from women, modern day women anyway, saying because there was a marriage ceremony in their place and drinks were shared among men and just few were given to women, then it means women are marginalized. Before marriage ceremony holds in any kingdom, in any community, the man who is going to marry the wife must have gone privately to do what is called Ibunne. Not Ibunna. Ibunne. And this is specified just for the mother of the bride. It includes fish of specified quantity, groundnut oil sometimes, clothing material sometimes, cash, onions, tubers of yam to the mother. So, when the event finally comes and men are known to drink, and the drinks also come, you expect them to share it equally with the women. I was thinking it was a fake account until the person told me that she's from Azungu in Ogwashuku. So, women from time immemorial, before colonization, because this is colonial Nigeria, had their say in the society. They had their organizations in the society. Imagine as viable as a market can be, how much money comes out from a market. As viable as it is a woman that controls every market, especially in Western Igbo land. They call them the Omu. They are in charge of the economy of every kingdom. When they collect these monies, they have chiefs. Women, the woman who is the Omu has chiefs who are even men, who help her to carry load. So when I see modern day women say that the Igbo traditional society reduces the role of women, I laugh at such stupidity because it is utterly a show of stupidity. I usually posit that it is women who know nothing or next to nothing about Igbo culture that make such utterances. And I am very, very right. Why am I right? It is the man till tomorrow that goes to a woman's house to marry her in Igbo culture. Women don't go to marry a man. When the woman's mother or father dies, or uncle self, the man is expected to go to his wife's place and do some rites and carry drinks to them as condolence. But when his own father dies, the woman's people they are not obliged to do anything. So we just say it is a man's world, but that is just a farce. It's a facade. The real talk is that it's a woman's world. And then the other time I was I was showing a documentary from Uturu, and then they took us to the cave of Nemchukwu. The cave is called Isiume, but inside Isiume, they said that is where the god Nemchukwu lived, the mother god. So the concept of Father God is a Christian introduction. To that community, it is Mother God, Nnem Chukwu, not Chukwunadim or Chukwunna. It is Nnem Chukwu, not Chukwunna. So you see how revered. And no matter the community you come from, I don't want to know the community. I believe this holds true. Ajani, or Ajana, or Ajeli, depending on what you call it in your place, is the strongest and most powerful deity in Igbo land. No matter how strong somebody is, if you bring out someone and say, swear by this Ajani, you will see them back down if they are lying. That is how much respect and regard the Igbo culture holds for women. And that was what carried on into the about women's resistance. So, as we reflect on this essential part of Africa's history, because it's rarely ever talked about, people talk about it as if it's just a regional movement. It only happened in Aba. Let us remember the courage of the women of Igbo land, especially Nwanyerugo and the people she mobilized in Aba. Their spirit continues to live on, urging us to continue the fight for equality. It encourages us to continue the fight against oppression. When I listen to our dear sister, Professor Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and I see her fight, it reminds me of the resilience, the tenacity, the strong will of the Igbo woman. Especially recently, when Urake, the hospital where her son and our beloved brother Nkanu, her Diokbala, died, tried to suppress her voice by seeking to stop the inquiry into the death of her son. And she came out boldly, fearlessly, like the Igbo woman, to talk. That is what the Igbo people are known for. Please, as we push further, you have seen videos, recent videos, because if we continue to talk about Igbo greatness by reaching back into history, it looks like it wasn't there. But even in modern time, even in this epoch, even in this present time, you saw the video of the 41-year-old girl, or 41-year-old lady, I should say, not a girl, who is presently the deputy premier of Manitoba in Canada, an Igbo woman. So the Igbo people are not known to step back. Let me give you an insight. When Hollywood were looking for somebody who would play the role of Harriet Tubman, Harriet Tubman is a liberator. She is remembered in America as the woman who led people out of slavery. Thousands of people out of slavery. They reached for an Igbo woman to play that role, and it was Cynthia Chinasa Onyedemma Nazo Erivolam that played the role. She played the role of Harriet Tubman. You may say, oh, she's just an actress. It's coincidence. Okay, no problem. Think about this. The writings of Olaudah Equiano, an Igbo man who was sold into slavery, purchased his own freedom and started writing. It was his writings that ended the transatlantic slave trade. The transatlantic slave trade ended because of the writings, the fierce writings of Olaudah Equiano. If you think that's also coincidence, Very recently, Hollywood needed to make a movie about Chisom, the first black woman to be elected into Congress in America and the first black woman to run for presidency. And they reached out for an Igbo woman again. Not the same woman as, not Cynthia Erivo. This time, Uzoamaka Adoba. That there is something about the Igbo people. And you may also say, okay, no, this is just a coincidence. It is too much to be coincidence. In the Game of Thrones, they needed to portray the character of a wealthy merchant who built his wealth from nothing. What did they do? They reached for an Igbo man again. Nonso Anozie. All these things are too numerous to be coincidence. Too numerous to be coincidence. What about 12 years a slave? What about 12 years a slave? The story of the man who was captured and sold into slavery. And he refused to let go of his identity. Who did they choose to play that role in Hollywood? Who? I know you already know. They reached for an Igbo man again. That was the role played, the epic role that got him an Oscar nomination. Played by Chiwetel Umadi Ejiofor. The Igbo people are known to resist slavery. The Igbo people are known for their self-determination drive. Have I mentioned the event that happened in Dunbar Creek? So, the Igbo people have been known since that day in Georgia in 1803, when they held hands and entered the river called Enuani. The white folks have known the Igbo people to resist colonialism. It is not a farce. It is not a made-up story. Now, people dismissed this Dunbar Creek Igbo landing story as just a folk tale until the locals confirmed how true it is. And historical researches in 18th century also proved it. What about the Ekumeku resistance? What about women's resistance? What about the Enugu bloodbath? There are so many instances. What about the 1967 to 1970 genocidal war, where all the tribes in Nigeria and all other nations joined hands together to subdue just one tribe? If they had left us with Nigeria, Biafra would have subdued Nigeria in no time. We had more officers than them. We were more equipped than them. We were blocked out. We had a blockade, but even in the middle of the blockade, we were still manufacturing. Until they started using starvation as a tool, and our people started dying. So the Igbo people have been known historically, not to be subservient, to resist slavery. So when I see videos of people saying the Yorubas are better than the Igbos, they know how to align themselves. Align yourself with what? What exactly are you aligning yourself with? What exactly are you aligning yourself with? You are aligning yourself with people who will subdue you, people who will steal from you, people who will not allow you the freedom to be yourself. They are the ones you are aligning yourself with, and you are very happy that the Yoruba people know how to align. If that is what it means to align oneself, I wouldn't want to be aligned to such at all. I wouldn't want to be aligned to such. We must be aligned to what will bring us prosperity, not what will bring us backward, or what will undermine our principles as a people. Because there is something you are known for. That thing you are known for, if you start reducing it, if you start toning it down, you have started toning it down. If this is what you are known for and suddenly you start telling the world, oh, that's no longer what I'm known for, they will start taking you for what you are known for. we are known as a people. We are known as a people to always stand for our rights. That is what we are known for. And we must continue to stand for our rights. I'm an atoze ija ejemi ijo yozo. Aso no na tu ija ejemi ijo yozo jemi ndakwalachi. Man enter house, a woman owns the home. Thank you so much, my brother. It's a man enter house, a woman owns the home. Women are makers of life. We, in Igbo culture, this is very much understood, such that the icon monoliths has a depiction of a woman through whom life came. And they said that is when man took his first breath in Isume, the first man to be born by vaginal delivery. Is believed to be from Igbo land, but that's a topic for another day. So today we looked at about women's resistance. Don't call it a riot. The colonialists did their best to suppress it by calling it a riot. You know, they say they give a, how do they say it? You give a dog a bad name in order to kill it. They call it a riot so that they can use all the forces in the world they want to use to subdue or suppress it. It wasn't a riot. It was beyond a riot. That was a resistance. It was very massive. Imagine thousands of women today marching in any state at all to say, enough is enough. You think the government will not think twice? Imagine 500 even, not thousands. But I'm looking at thousands, historically proven here. Thousands of women in 1929. Thousands of women in 1929 is equal to over 100,000 or a million in this particular epoch, considering the population of people that were in Igbo land as at the time. Nchije, thank you so much. Welcome on board. Benjamin, thank you so much. Please, if you're just joining us, this is Enuani Cultural Forum, where we promote the rich cultural heritage of the Igbo people. And today we are talking about the role of women in our struggle towards liberation, especially the about women's resistance of 1929. Please give this video a thumbs up, help it to rank better on the algorithm. So we said that in 1929, in a town called Oloko, in present-day southeastern Nigeria around Aba, a confrontation between a widow and a colonial tax collector, or tax enumerator as they are called, set off a movement that would mobilize, by most historical estimates, somewhere between 10 to 25,000 women. 10 to 25,000 women. Just give that a thought in your mind. Imagine 25,000 women in Igbo land staging a march to say, this is what we want today. Imagine 25,000 women closing down their shops, choosing 1 week to say, this is what we want in our land, or enough is enough. But in 1929, 10 to 25,000, historically proven, stepped out to the street to say, no more taxes, no more warrant chiefs disrespecting our traditional chiefs. It happened in Igbo land. And it is historically proven. Now, over the following 2 months after they did that protest, they destroyed the native court buildings that undermined their traditional rulers, destroyed European trading firms, and the Barclays Bank branch. You all know Barclays Bank. They had a branch in Aba. That branch was destroyed by these protesting women who were saying no, capital no, to taxation and disrespect to the traditional institution. Remember that we have a similar story in Ekumeku. where even traditional rulers were flogged in the presence of their subjects. But let's focus on about women's resistance, because this about women's resistance has been so undermined, like if it was just a protest. Unlike Ekumeku that operated in secrecy, these people came out in the open to say no, no to oppression. So they forced the British colonial government to dismantle the entire administrative system it had built across Igbo land. Which people did this? Women. The British called it a riot. Like I told you, they just have to minimize it by giving it a small name. They said it's a riot, but we don't call it a riot. We know what happened. We know what happened, and we have the platform to call it what it is. And what it was a resistance against colonialism, against the people who came to our place to try to tell us to pay them tax for living in our own land. I've said it severally that I don't know the difference between the present-day Fulani headsmen and the British administrators who came, because the same principle is what they use. Somebody comes to your land, builds a court, starts collecting taxes from you, the same thing the Fulani people are doing today, imposes his religion on you, forces you to stop practicing your own religion. The same thing the Fulani people are doing today. There's no difference. Anybody who resists them, they kill the person. The same thing Christianity did in Africa is the same thing Fulani people are doing today. Just that this one has a different tone of collecting ransom. That one didn't need to collect ransom. If you resist them, they unalive you and move on. Look at what King Leopold did of Belgium did in the African countries where he governed. So, what I'm saying is this. These women were able to force the colonial administrators to dismantle the colonial apparatus system they have already set up in Igbo land. The Igbo called it Ogunwuwanyi, and they used Ubolo. They didn't have guns. The women's war is what we call it, Ogunwuwanyi. Historians today regard it as one of the largest and most consequential anti-colonial uprisings in the 20th century West Africa. That is the status that is the status I wanted to have. It wasn't a riot. Ekumeku resistance is given prominence, well talked about, but nobody talks about this, about women's resistance, as if it just happened in Aba. It's just it was just a riot, women who are upset. No. That led to the dismantling of colonial administration and systems in Igbo land. Are you thinking of the reason why the British Nigerian government blacklisted the Igbo? Think no further. This is one of them. One of the major reasons why. These were the reasons why they blacklisted the Igbo people. Because the Igbo man, they believe, cannot easily be ruled. Now, to understand why this happened this way, let's go back to 1914. When the colonial governor, Lord Frederick Lugard, imposed a system of indirect rule across southern Nigeria, that was when all these things started. Now, renowned historian Professor Adiele Afibo documents in his landmark study the warrant chiefs the British installed, these warrant chiefs that were installed by the British colonial administration led by Lord Frederick Lugard. He installed them and appointed some local men as warrant chiefs to govern Igbo communities in their name. He needed something that will replicate what he saw in Yoruba land, in Benin and the rest. Because the Igbo people didn't have any overarching ruler who wields the power of life and death. He needed to introduce it. The Igbo people operated what is called democracy today. Before that word democracy came into the lexicon of any Westerner, we already knew what democracy was. This jury system you see in criminal justice administration today, before the jury system came into existence, we knew what it was. We call it ijume. I bring a matter to my kinsmen. Sorry, I'm deviating, but I have to explain this. If I bring a matter to my kinsmen today, and they finish discussing it, they will appoint a few people who they believe are unbiased, who are not related to me or the other party, and they will go out and deliberate and reach a decision and come back to recommend that decision. And then the oldest man, who is the Diokbala holder of the Ofo, will now adopt the decision publicly. That is how we operated. That was our criminal justice administration system of old. It was called organized anarchy because they will quarrel. It wasn't a joke. This one will bring his opinion, this one will bring it. They will argue and argue and argue back and forth until they reach a decision. We call it ijume. Those were our systems of administration until they started saying, no. If they allow us this liberty, it will not work. And they introduced warrant chiefs. And these warrant chiefs started undermining our democracy because we had democracy. They didn't have democracy. Europeans don't have democracy. They didn't operate democratically. They imposed people. They dethroned kings, even in Benin. In Koko, they dethroned Nana. In Benin, they dethroned Ovorawen. In Opobo, they removed Jaja. They were dethroning kings to install who they want. So they met this resistance in Igbo land. It was a profound, like the installation of this profound warrant chiefs was a profound break from our pre-colonial practice. It was a deviation and we didn't accept it easily. Igbo political life had no king per se. It ran on a decentralized village councils, age grade, and all that. Otu Ikolobia, Aibondi Otu Ikolo. Ikolo has two types. Ikolo are the Otu Itorobia for men. We have two types. Ikolo Nzizezi, that is the Ikolo who sweep the road. Our work is to sweep road. You graduate from this Ikolo who sweep the road to Ikolo that doesn't sweep road, but that monitors those who sweep. You will now graduate from there to the real Ikolo. You start going for village meeting. From Ikolo, you graduate to Ike. We have these groups that govern the society. Where the Ikolo group is like the police of the community. If you disobey your mother, you insult your father or anything like that, or you come to steal, we are the ones who will come to carry you and flog you. So we had our own system of governance until Frederick Lugard thought he was wiser and introduced warrant chiefs. And these warrant chiefs started trying to act like Oba of Benin in Igbo land. And they said no, the people said no, it cannot work. Okay, so I'm just trying to give you a background of what happened. I will still explain it further because some people just think, it's smart in Igbo people don't start to the fight. No. Something led to it. Now, like I said, I will be quoting sources too. I'll be quoting sources. An anthropologist, Kamene Okonjo, and a political scientist, Judith Van Allen, each of them described as a dual-sex political structure in which women held real, they described the Igbo system as a dual-sex political structure. I've been saying this from the very moment I started this live stream, that if you have Diokbala, you have Ada, If you have Obi, you have Omu. If you have Ikolo, you have Umuada. There's nowhere anything you have for men, you have for women. Some of them said women have and they have men in their midst. There's no position a man can hold in Igbo traditional political system that a woman cannot hold. No one. A woman can undergo rights and even turn to a man while she's still bearing the physical structure of a woman. She's addressed and regarded as a man. That is how the Igbo structure runs. So I like this description by Professor Kamine Okonjo and Judith Van Allen. They describe the Igbo political system as a dual-sex political structure in which women held real independent authority over markets. Did you hear that word, independent authority over markets? Independent authority. If a woman decides that this is the price, at least I saw that one as a little boy. If a woman decides on a market day that this is how much they are going to sell Gari today, that is the amount they are going to sell Gari. They regulate prices. There's nothing at all they don't get involved in. They were in charge of the community and they are still in charge today. So the women operated real, they held real independent authority over markets, farming disputes sometimes, and communal discipline through institutions such as Mikiri or the women councils and Omu, like I gave as example. Now the warrant chief system bypassed all of that, started undermining the 8th grade system, started undermining the Umuada, the Omu. The Opala of the Igbo, the head of every lineage today, doesn't undermine Umuada. If Umuada says a woman has committed adultery and she's going for propitiation, the Opala doesn't subvert or overturn, the king doesn't subvert or overturn it. Nobody stands in their way. But these warrant chiefs came and turned everything upside down. Within a decade, just within 10 years, many chiefs were seizing property, conscripting people into forced labor. And according to multiple historical accounts, within this period, they were taking wives without paying customary bride price in Igbo land. This is what Frederick Lugard installed and attempted to impose on Igbo people. I'm giving you the background to the Aba women's resistance. I've never discussed this topic, but I'm discussing it elaborately today. We may take up to an hour, but what I'm pleading with you to do is, if you're watching this live stream, double tap on the video to give it thumbs up. Just double click. You give it thumbs up. When you double tap like this, you have given the video thumbs up. It takes nothing away from you, but just to encourage the stream to reach a wider audience. Please don't forget to do so. You are encouraging the stream to reach a wider audience. This information you are getting today, somebody else can also get it. And this information I'm giving you is not a joke. Some people need this for their university project. This is a bigger topic that you can think of in terms of university, because I have students who reach out to me to suggest topics for them. This is a very big topic. With this knowledge you have on ground, the person has completed his final year project and left university. I have so many students who have graduated after doing topics that I suggested to them. So many. For the past 6-7 years I've been doing so. So please, if you see this video, double tap on it to give it thumbs up. Help it to rank better on the algorithm while we continue. So these warrant chiefs were taking wife without paying bride price against the Igbo culture. They were doing so much. Part of the things they were doing again was that they were conscripting people and giving them forced labor. If they now have power, so much power, that they now execute it anyhow they like. So in 1928, the British introduced direct taxation on men. The same thing I told you earlier, that the Fulani herdsmen who go to communities today and impose taxes on them are not worse than the British who came to communities and did the same thing. In places like Ogwashu, after the Ekumeku resistance, communities were pleading with the British colonial administrators to please allow them to sell their daughters into marriage in order to have money to pay their own fines that were imposed on them. What the fines? That they destroyed the equipment with which they came to kill them. That was the fine. In Ogwashu Kingdom. I am from Ubuluku Kingdom, a nearby community to Ogwash. And what I'm telling you is factual, documented by them, the British, not even me. So, this thing is really touching because history usually repeats itself, just that this time it's repeating itself in the name of Islam. It came first in the name of Christianity. Now it's coming in the name of Islam. So when the British in 1928 introduced a direct taxation on men, it didn't pass without serious incident, because suddenly men now start to paying tax to Onyocha. You are not living in his land. You are not farming on his father's farmland. He's not giving you anything at all to produce what you're producing in your farm. Then after selling it, you pay tax to Onyocha to go and build their place, because they went to a conference in Berlin and shared Africa among themselves. That's it now. Nigeria was given to them. So they purchased Nigeria through the Royal Niger Company. If you go now, as we speak, kindly do what I'm telling you to do. Go online and look for the logo, the company logo of Royal Niger Company. Compare it with the Nigerian coat of arms, and you will find that it was a company that first purchased Nigeria as a business treaty that later turned to the British government, handed it over to them, and then they continued from there. That's what you have till today. So this tax system is what led to the problem, because in 1928 the British introduced direct taxation on men, which passed without incident. Women suspected correctly that they were next. You are taxing the men, and the men didn't raise any alarm because they didn't want to die. They have seen people die. Men have seen people die, they didn't want to die. So women knew that they were the next. They will be the next to be taxed. If these people, these colonialists, Ndiocha, can task men, very soon they will be next. And they suspected it correctly. Now, a fear sharpened by the global finance crash of 1927, because in 1929, the global finance system crashed, which had already devastated the homes of those who rely on palm oil. We are the ones who own the palm oil. We sell to you. So at least our own will not crash. It's your own that will crash. So in 1929, September, Assistant District Officer John Cook ordered a recount of households in the Bende division. Now in Bende division, this district officer called Captain John Cook asked them to recount the buildings, this time to include women's livestock and their dependents. On the morning of November 18th, a census enumerator named Mark Emerowa arrived at the compound of a widow, Nwanyerowa. The widow's name was Nwanyerowa. On the morning of November 18th, a census enumerator named Mark Emerowa arrived at the compound of this Nwanyerowa while she was processing her palm oil in peace, and instructed her to count her goats and her people. She refused, demanding to know, was your mother counted? Agurunegi. You that is counting me, Negi. Now, a direct reference to the fact that Igbo women had never before been subject to colonial taxation. She's reminding the man that if your mother was not counted in her time, there's no point counting me. This is not our culture. Now, a physical struggle followed, as expected now. Nwanyiruwa carried her account to a nearby gathering of women already discussing the looming task. According to several historical accounts, because we have to compare several historical accounts to get to a logical conclusion, she told them simply that it had already begun. Not that they are planning to tax us. They have already started. They actually came to my house to count. 3 local women leaders, Ikonia, Nwanedia is another name, and Ugo, activated an old Igbo emergency work, sending palm leaves to surrounding villages as a signal of urgent mobilization. We know this is Omu. She started sending Omu to villages as signal of mobilization. Now, they passed this Omu hand to hand faster than any colonial communication line. Nobody understood what it was. It was mobilization, an indigenous weapon turned against the colonial state. What followed drew on a long-standing Igbo practice scholars call sitting on a man, an institutionalized form of public shaming in which women converged on an offender's compound, sang satirical songs detailing his misdeeds, danced, and refused to leave until the man yielded. It functioned, in effect, as an indigenous court of public opinion. Traditionally, it was used to discipline men who violated communal norms. It is in every community. We call it Ine. During Ine festival, you can even tell a king his misdeeds. He cannot sue you, cannot summon you, cannot fine you. This is what these women did. They gathered together, sang, and were chanting against the colonial administrators. And there were 10 to 25,000 of them. In November 1929, it was turned against the colonial administration itself. No longer the Emerowa, the man who came to collect tax. It has now turned on the people who sent Emerowa. So by November 23rd, women from Aba, women from Aba, women from Owerri, women from Ikote Ekpene had converged on Oloko. Now their faces were marked with chalk and charcoal, carrying palm fronds and stick. Women warrant chief Okugo ordered his men to beat the demonstrators. A serious breach of the Igbo taboo against assaulting women, another serious taboo. The protests only intensified and spread across markets and kinship networks. And kinship networks, not kingship, kinship, the related communities. Oyenu, Owibe. So it escalated. Over the following weeks, the uprising spread across roughly 6,000 square miles of Owerri and Calabar provinces, home to an estimated 2 million people, because the entire population of the Igbo people was over 4 million, according to pre-colonial studies, drawing in primarily Igbo and the Ibibio women into the fight, with some from Andoni, Ogoni, and Opobo communities joining as well. Remember, I told you they had also dethroned Jaja of Opobo. Protesters besieged and ultimately destroyed 10 native court buildings. carted away properties belonging to them. I don't know why Europeans will call it looting. You don't loot what is yours. If you come to my house to collect my goat, I come to your court and see my goat, I collect my goat. It's not looting. They started reclaiming properties that the Europeans had looted from them. The British colonial administrators had looted from them. They collected them back. And then the most important part was that they destroyed Barclays Bank. You should know Barclays. They are the ones that sponsor the Premier League. That's why it's called the Barclays Premier League. So Barclays Bank is one of the oldest and most reputable British banks. They destroyed the Barclays Bank branch. And then they freed prisoners from local jails and forced prisoners from local jails is the same thing as people who Boko Haram and the rest abduct and take into the forest today. British came to Igbo land, imposed a tax system on the men. If you don't pay, they imprison you in your own land. Why were we paying tax to them? Were we farming on their land? Were they providing fertilizers for us to farm? Why will we be paying tax to you, and if they don't pay, you imprison them? The same thing Boko Haram is doing in some communities today. There's no difference at all. In fact, in one of the African countries, Ghana, they beheaded the king and took his head back to Netherlands. It was just recently that the head was returned. Very gory, but his head was preserved as a trophy for the Dutch. And it was returned to the Ghanaian government recently. Head of a king. Tell me the difference between Fulani herdsmen and British colonial administrators. No difference at all. So, these women, courageous women, started freeing imprisoned brothers and sisters of theirs, uncles, husbands from the local jails, and forced the numerous warrant chiefs that they had to publicly surrender. They publicly surrendered their caps of office and their regalia. Now, this historian, Toyin Folala, co-author of the major documentary History of the Uprising, notes that the women's demands escalated well beyond tax relief. So when it is when you commit murder again that they will remind you the ones you've committed before. So the women were no longer demanding that you will not collect tax from us. They were now naming the various atrocities committed by the British colonial administrators in Igbo land, and they were demanding that they all ended henceforth. So, first of all, they made the warrant chiefs to surrender and relinquish their position, give up their regalia, and denounce being a warrant chief. And then demanded tax relief and also insisted for the outright abolition of the warrant chief system. Those were their demands. Now in Opobo, like I told you, Opobo is an Igbo community. Even if today we see people who shamelessly and annoyingly have decided to stop talking to people who have identity crisis. We are so big that the Igbo nation doesn't beg anybody to be Igbo. So when I see people express identity crisis saying that we are Obani, we are not Igbo, the person who founded your community is an Igbo man. Jaja of Opobo was an Igbo man. From Ami Igbo. Jaja is from Ami Igbo. It is documented history. So Opobo was already an aggrieved community when this happened, and they joined to fight the Europeans who took away their king. The colonial government answered with police and troops, as they usually do. They did that in Ekumeku. In mid-December 1929, most accounts center on the 15th and 16th of December 1929. The conflict reached its deadliest point at Opobo. Now in Opobo, soldiers opened fire on demonstrators soldiers opened fire on the demonstrators. Imagine that you are in your community. You came out to fight against people who are stealing your resources. And they deployed soldiers like Tinubu does today to open fire against you. So soldiers opened fire on demonstrators with rifles and Lewis machine gun. Compiled across colonial and academic sources, estimates of the dead range from 51 to 52 women, with dozens more wounded. In clashes concentrated in Calabar and Owerri provinces, not a single colonial officer was killed. So these women were very wise in their demonstration of anger and resentment. They did not unalive any single British officer, unlike Ekumeku, where most British officers, including the district's colonial officer Crew Reed, was killed in Owa. But in this resistance organized by women, not one colonial officer was killed or a warrant chief. But over 51 to 55 people were killed in one instance in Opobo. Tell me again the difference between Fulani herdsmen and the British colonial administrators that came to Nigeria. Now, the scale of bloodshed forced a reckoning. So in March 1930, the colonial government convened the Aba Commission of Inquiry under Governor Sir Graham Thompson. Now, Graham Thompson was to lead an inquiry into what happened. Over 38 years, it had this inquiry had that over 38 years, it had testimony from 485 witnesses. Yet, only about 103 of them were women. Witnesses of what happened among women. He had 485 witnesses. 103 of them were women. An asymmetry historian, Nina Mba, has cited as evidence of how marginal women's own voices remained in that testimony. Even in the inquiry meant to address the grievances of women, they were interviewing men. Remember, the person doing this is Graham Thompson, a European. In their own culture, women have no say. Don't mind what you're seeing today. In their own culture, women had no say. We all know the struggles they went through before you have Queen Elizabeth to lead. But it was very simple, and that was yesterday. But it was very simple, very, very simple for Odu to take over kingship of Ogwashugu, for Ozimegu to take over kingship of Ubuluku, for a woman to assume kingship in Enugu Ezike, and so many other places. So, in their own culture, women were in the background. They had no say. So they exhibited the same thing in Igbo land. You set up a panel of inquiry, and in your panel of inquiry to investigate women's grievances, you were interviewing men. That is classic Britain for you. Now, this historian Nina Mba put it very rightly, because he demonstrated how marginal women were. Even so, the findings forced real change, because the warrant chief system was formally abolished and replaced with collective massed bench of court. And for the first time, women were appointed to sit in their native courts, as it should be. Among those who testified were Mary Okezie. Among those who testified, Mary Okezie went to found the Ungwa Women's Association. These are real names of real people. Now, Ngwa Women's Association carried the momentum of 1929 into sustained political organization. Let's do a little historiography of this as we wrap up. For nearly 50 years, British colonial records, even the first scholarly monograph on the subject of about women's resistance, Harry Gailey's presuming hidden male instigators, despite no evidence to support that claim. Now, Harry Gailey presumed that it was men that instigated women into that rebellion. Not at all. The men were already paying tax without complaining before women heard that it will soon become their turn, and they said, no, it can never be. Okay? So it was not men who instigated women to rebel or to disagree with such obnoxious decision of them paying tax in their homeland, of their livestock, of their children. That was insane. So Harry Gailey's book got that very, very wrong. It was later on that people like Judith Van Allen, in her influential 1972 article titled Sitting on a Man, who first insisted on reframing the episode as a deliberate, organized war waged through indigenous institutions of female authority that colonized, this female authority that colonialism had tried to erase. Female, as I said, thank God a professor of history is affirming it. Judith Van Allen said in her influential article of 1972 titled Sitting on a Man, she was the first to insist on reframing the episode as a deliberate, organized war waged through indigenous institutions of female authority that colonialism had tried to erase. Colonialism is the beginning of the erasure of the authorities of women in Igbo land and Igbo culture. It was colonialism that taught men that you have to work while the woman takes care of the home. It wasn't like that before. Before colonialism, the man worked, the woman worked. I'll give you an instance. If you're an Igbo person, this will apply to you. In our farm, once we finish clearing the farm and finish stumping, my father shares the farm into different sections because he wouldn't want you to plant women's crop in men's crop. What are women's crop? Okra is women's crop. Cassava is women's crop. All those women's crop will not enter into the men's section. The men's section will have yam and yam alone because cassava will spoil the yam with its shades. He needs his yam to have enough sunlight. So women have their own farm, men have their own farm. Not men go to the farm, women stay at home and look after the home. No. It was shared responsibility. Men take care of meetings to organize how the community is run. Women take care of the market on a day. If you quarrel in the market, if you fight in the market, you carry too much load in the market, you call somebody a discriminatory term, a derogatory term in the market, you have women to deal with, not men. So the traditional society in Igbo land have so much responsibility placed on the shoulders of women in terms of political administration. It was the colonial administrators that relegated women to the background, now suggesting that the about women's resistance was instigated by men who were aggrieved. Men were paying taxes without complaining because they didn't want to die. They didn't want to be imprisoned as well. It was women, especially this particular widow Wanyerugo, who refused to pay tax, who went and mobilized other women to start up a movement. They went to those prisons and freed their brothers, their husbands, their children who were imprisoned, and destroyed native courts, especially destroying the Barclays Bank in Oloto. So I want to thank this historian, Professor Judith Van Allen, for this very great work of not revising history but making this historical correction. Now, later historians after her, including Caroline Ifeka and Susan Martin, extended that analysis themselves, situating the revolt within the broader economic collapse of 1929 and the erosion of women's control over palm produce markets. Remember, I've always told you women were in charge of markets. These colonial tax collectors took away everything from them. It's like what is happening today. If you go to the market today, you may see a naked girl. That never happened when I was a little boy. That never used to happen. Market has a dress code, for God's sake. There is what you will not wear to the market. There are things you cannot do in the market. Market is a sacred place. Before market even starts happening, the Omus have come to the market to pray and do cleansing. Every Eke market day, Eke is our own market. Before market starts every day, every Eke day, that's for 4 days. They will come to Eke market and do cleansing and do prayer and draw people from every side to come and trade and pray for a free trade that will not cause them harm. So market is a sacred place in Igbo land. So there is a dress code for market. There are things you don't wear to the market. Not today you go to the market and you see a girl with open breast and open skirt. She cannot even bend down to pick up something. So if you ask the Omu that we have today, I'm not blaming them because many of them are my friends. If you ask the Omu of today, why are you people not doing anything at all about this? They say local government has collected every of the revenue that they are supposed to collect in the market, which is what these colonial administrators did. They chased away women from collecting revenues in the market and organizing the market, and they started doing it by themselves. That's what the colonial administrators did. So when the palm produce market crashed in 1929, it affected them because you have to come to the market to sell before you can collect your tax. And they were no longer collecting tax in the market. They now decided to bring that tax to the homes. Started counting number of homes in Igbo land so that they can collect tax. So the number one reason for census back then was so that you can collect tax. So today, the Aba Women's War or resistance stands as one of the earliest and largest coordinated challenges to British colonial authority anywhere in West Africa. But remember, before Aba Women's resistance, there was Ekumeku resistance. But I just want to draw the fact that Aba Women's resistance should not be relegated to the background. It was a legitimate struggle towards the end of colonialism in Africa, because it was a movement that was organized early by women using indigenous political tools the colonial state failed to recognize until it was too late. It organized a foundational case of African historiography, a reminder that some of the most consequential resolutions in modern African history were not led by armies, but by market women bearing palm leaves or and a refusal to be counted. Like I've always told you, this is Enuani Cultural Forum where we promote the rich cultural heritage of the Igbo people, and this is an intellectual platform. Today we discussed the Aba Women's resistance, and I'm going to list a few of the sources of our article because we were not just talking, we were citing intellectual works, one of which is Professor Adiele Afibo, The Warren Chiefs, Indirect Rule in Southeastern Nigeria between 1891 and 1829. This one was published by Longman in 1972. Then you have Judith Van Allen, Sitting on a Man, Colonialism and the Lost Political Institutions of Igbo Women. Canadian Journal of African Studies, 1972, page 165 to 181. Kamene Okonjo, Women's Political Participation in Nigeria. The Black Woman's Cross-Culturally. The Black Woman Cross-Culturally. Canadian, this one was published by Cambridge Sheckman in 1981. And then Nina Emma Mba, Nigerian Women Mobilized. Women's Political Activity in Southern Nigeria, 1900 to 1965, published by University of Berkeley, California Press. Now, Carolina Ife Kamola wrote Female Militancy and Colonial Revolt, the Women's War of 1929, Eastern Nigeria, in Perceiving Women, New York, John Wiley and Jones, 1975. And then you have Susan M. Martin, Palm Oil and Protest, an Economic History of the Ungwa Region, Southeastern Nigeria, 1800 to 1980, Cambridge University Press, 1988. Most of these works are older than me. Toyin Folala and Adam Paddock, The Women's War of 1929, A History of Anti-Colonial Resistance in Eastern Nigeria, Durham, Carolina Press, New York City. Now, Harry A. Gailey and wrote The Road to Aba, A Study of British Administrative Policy in Eastern Nigeria. This one was published by New York Press in 1970. And with this, we have come to the end of this live stream. Today, we discussed the Aba women's resistance as one of the earliest anti-colonial resistance struggles in Africa, not West Africa, in Africa. It stands shoulder to shoulder with the Ekumeku resistance, because while the Ekumeku operated as a guerrilla warfare, these women came head on and they let no blood out. It was even their own blood that was spilled, but they were able to achieve their aim. So I asked, can such number of women come out today to protest in Igbo land? These women we have today, do they know that their mothers were able to achieve this? Or they leave every responsibility for men? Remember, in that time, men were paying the taxes without complaining, until one year ago the widow said, no, I cannot pay. Let's ponder on that. My name, as usual, is Prince Onwadenem Ngozi Chukwuka. Thanks for being a part of this live stream. I will look forward to seeing you in my subsequent videos. Please look through our channel. You will find so many other videos that will suit your fancy. Please binge on them. Thanks for watching. If you are not yet subscribed to our channel, please look for the subscribe button and hit it right away.